Hello, lovely ones. I hope you're all okay. Well, this week's podcast isn't about trying to sell you anything or trying to tell you anything important that I think you might need to know or want to know. I'm just going to tell a simple story, a really sweet, lovely story that goes back 30 years and a little more to the day and the time I met my husband. It's quite an interesting tale, and for a long time it never occurred to me that it was interesting until I was asked about it sometime, and I was telling the person who'd asked me, and they were riveted and said, you know what, that one of the loveliest things I've ever heard and one of the weirdest. So it made me think that maybe there was something in that other people might like to hear. And I've told other people since, and they've all said it's a fascinating story. And it's a funny thing because sometimes we need other people to validate what is or what isn't interesting in our own lives when we don't really regard it as anything overly special. But looking back, I now know that it was an incredibly special series of events that brought us together. So it has developed into a story, and I'm going to share it with you now. Okay, so it was back in 1983 where I'm getting old. I'm forgetting what decade I'm in. Going back to 1993, this is where the story really begins. And at the time, I was living in New Zealand, living and working in a very well-known tourist town. And I had a very lovely apartment because I was the rental accommodation agent for the town. I had a lovely kind of a penthousey type apartment with a beautiful covered balcony that overlooked the lake. And there was a night when I was home alone. My flatmate was out somewhere, and the huge storm came in, and I could see it rolling its way up the lake, mountains at either side. We had a great view in that place, and it was truly a wonderful place to live for a while. And I was always pinching myself at how lucky I was. But on this particular night, I looked out across the mountains, and there was a huge electrical storm, forked lightning, thunder loud enough to rattle the teeth, not just the windows. And I remember sitting outside on the covered, under the roof on this covered balcony, feeling the rain as it hit the ground all around me, and feeling the mist that rises up from the rain. In those circumstances, it was a very violent storm. And I was single at the time, and I remember thinking to myself, gosh, I wonder if my Prince Charming is out in this tonight. Hold that thought. A year or so later, it was the following year. Yeah, the following year, 1994. So they got that one right. I decided that I didn't want to keep my job in this town anymore, and I wanted to move away. But it was a big logistical thing to move away. It was 7 hours over 2 mountain passes to get to the nearest big city that had a university. And I'd decided that I wanted to go to uni because I was an adult, and in New Zealand you can go to university by virtue of turning 20. You don't have to prove academic worth or anything like that. You can just go. So I decided that I wanted to go to university. So I packed up my life and my cat and moved to Christchurch. But before I did that, I spoke to a friend. I didn't have a car where we lived, and I spoke to a friend of mine there who said, yes, you can borrow my car, because I wanted to go up for enrolment week and do all the paperwork, complete my loan application and all the rest of it. But I needed to get there. And of course, it was a whole day to get there. And he said to me, look, just borrow my car, take my car. So I took his car, which was a beautiful big Mitsubishi something or other. It was like flying a plane. It was lovely. So anyway, I got myself to Christchurch and went and stayed with a friend. And on enrolment day, I was standing in the queue waiting to speak to someone and hand in all my paperwork and everything. And I got chatting to a woman who had done the previous year the courses that I was about to do. And while we were stood there in this long line waiting to be dealt with, we got to talking about different academic stuff. And she said to me, look, I've got all these notes from last year, and you're welcome to them if you want them. So why don't I meet you in a pub in town tomorrow night? So this was the Monday, and she wanted to meet me on the Tuesday, and I didn't know the city. I had no idea where this place was. So she gave me directions, And we agreed that I'd meet her on the Tuesday night to pick up these notes. So I went from my friend's house, I got a bus into town and went to this pub, and she didn't turn up. So that's all right. I waited for an hour and had a drink and then another one, and then decided to toddle off back to my friends and see what developed after that. And so I got the bus back to my friend's house, and as I was walking through the door, the phone was ringing, and it was this lady, and she was on the phone, and she said, "I was there, where were you?" And I said, "Well, I was there, where were you?" And it turned out that this pub had 2 bars. I didn't know it had 2 bars, and she didn't know that I didn't know that. So she was waiting in one, I was waiting in the other. We both felt stood up and both made our way home. But she had the foresight to call and say, "Hey, look what happened." So we managed to sort that out. And she said, "Well, look, I'm going back to that pub on Friday night. I'm going to meet my friend who's just started seeing this guy. And it's our first sort of evening out together as friends and meeting this chap. So do you want to come down on Friday night and have a drink with us, and I'll give you the notes?" So I said, "Yeah, that's fine. I know where I'm going now. I know there's a second bar and I'll find you in there." So that happened, and I went down on the Friday night, and I managed to connect with her and her friend and this boyfriend. So they all introduced each other to me and everything. So there's me sitting there with this lady I'd met in the queue on enrollment day, and her friend and the friend's boyfriend. And after half an hour or so, this guy was obviously feeling a little bit overloaded with estrogen and wanting to even up the odds. So he said, "Do you mind if I just go and invite a couple of my mates down to sit with us tonight?" Because I think he was feeling really intimidated by me with 3 women he didn't know. And so we said, yeah, that's fine. So he goes away, makes a phone call, and about half an hour later, 2 guys walk into the bar. And they're both 6 feet tall, long, tall streaks of water. And they've got their crash helmets and their leathers and all the rest of it. And they sit down at the table with us, and everybody orders another round of drinks, and we all start talking. And one of them was the man who is now my husband. And because I'm a motorcyclist too, and have been since I was 15, we started talking about bikes. And the bike I had at the time, what was it? I think I might have had a 500 something or other, a custom bike, and it was being worked on at the time. It needed to have an engine change and different things. So we were kind of talking about that. We talked for most of the evening, me and this guy, and he didn't impress me much. He seemed to be a bit of a nerd. So anyway, at the end of the night, we all kind of disbanded, and I got the last bus home to my friend's house, and then went back to where I was living for the week to pack up my stuff and move back to Christchurch proper. And in the meantime, I got myself a room in a shared flat and was pretty much set up to go up there. So got the cat, got some drugs into him for the journey. Still feel bad about that. But anyway, we got there, and we sort of set up shop and started going to lectures. And I met this lady who had introduced me to all these people. I met her for lunch one day in one of the cafes at uni, and she said to me, "Kerry, the guy who you were talking to on Friday night wants your phone number." And I said, "Does he?" I said, why would he want my phone number? And she said, "Well, I think he wants to ask you out." And I thought, no, not really up for that, because I just literally made this huge commitment to 3 or 4 years at university full time. Really wasn't looking for a relationship. And I said to her, "Look, I don't think he's my type particularly. He's not, he isn't the kind of guy I'd go for." And so, but I said, "Yeah, give him my number, whatever, So anyway, a few days later, he rings and says, "Look, we're all going out. There's a bunch of us going out on Friday night for a few drinks, a few games of pool, if you want to come." And we did that, and we went out 2 or 3 Friday nights in a row. And so we kind of got to know each other as friends. And then he'd laid this big spiel on me one night. "Oh, I hope you're happy just with us being friends, because I'm not looking for anything." And I thought, oh, thank God. Yes, let's just be friends, because I didn't want anything else. He didn't inspire me. But we bumbled along together for, I don't know, probably over a year. And when we had events to go to, we used to go together. I used to, because I had no money, I was a poor student, I I used to ring up the competitions on the radio station in the morning and win free tickets to different things like free movie premieres or Woodford Glen Speedway, that kind of thing. And whenever I won a pair of tickets, I would call Kerry and say, hey, do you want to come to this? You know, so we got to see a lot of stuff. We got to go to rock bands and Speedway nights and all that stuff, courtesy of these radio station tickets that I kept winning. And it became a long-standing joke after a while. And we were friends for quite a long time. And then I'd planned to come to England for the end of the academic year, which finishes in October, November in New Zealand, and then we get like 3 or 4 months off. Our academic year starts in February, end of Feb. So I had this block of 3 or 4 months, and I was coming back to England to visit friends and family here. And one of my other friends said to me, what are you going to do if he meets someone while you're gone? And I thought, what? No, he can't do that. He can't. No, that can't happen. And then it kind of caused me to question what the relationship really was with this guy, because we'd never gone past that first conversation about the fact that we both just wanted to be friends. And I sort of had it in my mind that he firmly, was still of that opinion. And so that coincided with another conversation I had with a girlfriend at the time in Christchurch, the one I'd actually stayed with when I first started getting the process of uni underway. And she said to me, why don't you get together with Kerry? He's perfect for you. And I said, no, I don't fancy him. And I'm sure he doesn't fancy me. We've had that conversation. So anyway, I get on the plane and come to England, and I just couldn't stop thinking about him and thinking, I was very, very anxious about the fact that he might meet someone else, and my drinking buddy, as it were, my concert buddy, my movie buddy was going to be gone, and I'd be left alone again. So anyway, we had a lot of conversations while I was in the UK. He just got himself a mobile phone, and it was one of those big old bricks that belongs in a museum now. Stupendous cost of using this thing, but he used to ring me at my friend's house where I was staying in the UK, and we'd have quite long conversations. And I realised that something had changed, and he said something to me about the fact that a friend of his was meant to have gone back to New Zealand from Australia for Christmas, but had decided against it and said, like, we can't really afford it, but we would come back if there was going to be like a special occasion, like a wedding. And so, I skipped a bit before. There's me a post-menopausal sponge brain. Anyway, before all that, we'd gone to a mutual friend's wedding, and we'd realised that there was something going on between us. And, everybody seems to get a bit romantic at weddings. And so this was about 3 weeks before I was due to fly to the UK, possibly even less. And we were at this wedding, and he turned around and he gave me just a little kiss. And I said, well, give me a real one then. And that was me sticking my head above the parapet thinking, I'm about to get it shot off because he's not up for a relationship. And he just looked at me and he beamed and he says, really? I said, yeah, go on then, give me a decent kiss. So he did. And then we kind of got together that night. But we hadn't talked about anything beyond the fact that we just kind of fallen from a friendship into a relationship. And then the following morning he was due to come over and pick up my bike and take it to his grandparents' house while I was going to be in England to keep it safe, because I was giving up my flat to do that. And he arrived at the house, and I was standing in the driveway waiting for him, and my heart was in my mouth. I thought, have we just blown a really good friendship? Have we ruined what we had by trying to take it somewhere else? But he got out of the car and he came up, and I was standing there holding my cat in the driveway, and he came over and he put his arms around both of us and said, family hug. And that's when I knew that things were going to be okay. So I travelled to the UK knowing that I was in love with someone who was actually in love with me, and that's the first for a long time. But anyway, in this conversation, he said, the friends from Aussie aren't coming, but they would come if there was going to be a wedding. So that made me think, and I thought, yeah, actually, I do. I would love to marry this guy. So because where I was living was in Preston in Lancashire, it was the town I was born in, I took the big gamble and bought a wedding dress in my hometown, in the town I was born in. And I bought a special suitcase, which I still have more than 30 years on. And I've still got that suitcase. And I brought my wedding dress back from England and just quietly put it away in the back of the wardrobe. And it was a leap year. And I was due to fly back in on, I think it was about the 16th of February, but I changed my tickets to fly back on Valentine's Day. And Kerry lived with his Nana and Granddad, so I contacted Nana and Granddad and I said, look, I'm changing my tickets. Can you pick me up at the airport? And can you make sure that he doesn't go away for the weekend? And Nana said, oh, well, I think he's going to. I think he's going. He's planning on. And I said, you've got to stop him. Don't let him go. So anyway, they picked me up from the airport, and Nana had got a red rose from a florist for me, and they took me to the building site where Kerry was working, because he was a builder back in those days. He was building houses before he changed careers. And so I went to this building site, walked onto this building site with this red rose in my hand 2 days ahead of schedule. And the look on his face was absolutely priceless. And he said, well, that better be for me. And I said, well, it's not for anybody else, you plonker. So that was that. So that was me. That was Valentine's Day. And that February had 29 days in it, and I had planned to propose to him, because that's supposedly when you're supposed to be able to propose to a man and not have him turn you down. It's considered very bad form to turn down a lady's marriage proposal, apparently. So I was gearing myself up for that. But on Valentine's night, his dad had booked us a table in a restaurant not far from where he was living. So we went and did that, and we had a lovely evening. And a week or so after that, I was gearing myself up for this great proposal and trying to figure out how I was going to do it without looking and feeling like a total tit, hugest leap of faith of my life that I was planning. And we went out to a pub with friends, and we'd had a fair skinful. And back in those days, we used to drink and drive, which was a bit naughty. But anyway, we drove back home to where he was living, and I was staying there too with his dad, and I had a separate room. It was all very respectable, as it were. But we pulled into the driveway, and we were both bursting to go to the loo, and he couldn't get the key out fast enough out of the side pocket of the door. So he eventually got it out and said to me, look, he said, you go in, use the loo, I'm going to go in the garden. So I thought, right, okay, whatever. So I managed to get in the house, up the hallway, into the loo. And that it was like a religious experience, that honestly. And when I came back down into the dining room, he came back into the house, because he'd had a similar experience outside in the bushes. And he came in and he said, oh my God, he said, that's such a relief. Do you want to get married? And I'm like, what? And I said, what? And he said, seriously? He said, would you like to marry me? Just like that. I mean, no down on one knee, no romantic anything, just the relief of being able to empty his bladder, and in the same sentence, without even a comma, would you like to get married? So I said, yeah, I'll go on then. So that was a big romantic proposal. That was how we got engaged. And we got married the year after, and we had to tie that in with my academic year so that we could get married and have a honeymoon before university went back for my third or fourth year, whatever it was. Third year, I think it was, yeah. And so that was the story of how we got together. And the funniest, quirkiest thing was that I'll round the story back to the very beginning, when I was back in the previous town and watching the electrical storm and wondering whether or not my Prince Charming was out in that awful weather. And as it turned out, he was. He was with a group of four-wheel drivers that were stuck on the wrong side of a swollen river that had risen within minutes of the storm starting, and they couldn't get back across to the town. So they were stuck there overnight, these guys, in this huge electrical storm, about 10 vehicles. And that was Kerry. And where he was stuck was, as the crow flies, about 8 miles from where I was sitting in my apartment that night. And so my Prince Charming was out that night in the storm. And I think the lightning fused our futures. And I think we were destined to meet, because I got the loan of a car to go to university. I met someone who introduced me to someone else who introduced me to him in a pub that neither of us had ever been before and never had any interest in going to again. And the person I met in that Kieran enrolment day, I didn't end up staying in touch with. But the girlfriend of hers and the guy she was with on that first date that night, they're now married. They got married a few months before we did. So that was 1994 when all of that kicked off. 93 when I had the thought in my head. 94 when I met my Prince Charming, who had been out in the storm. 97 when we got married, and we're now into our 29th year of being married. Still happy, still excited about each other, and still looking forward to whatever the future may bring. And it's been a hell of a ride with one thing and another. We've had the ups, we've had the downs, we've had the times when we've questioned what the point of it all is. Everybody goes through that. But after 30 years, I just feel so blessed that the planets collided the way they did and brought my life together the way they did. And I think it's situations like that make you believe in fate, that make you think that there's something so much bigger than yourself out there working in your favor. Because he was by himself, kind of. He'd had a girlfriend at the time that he was not particularly interested in, and trying to work out how to extricate himself from that relationship. And we just fit together, and I decided that, yes, he was wonderful, and that everybody else was right when they could see what I couldn't, and said, yeah, get together with this guy. He's your soulmate. He is, Maxine. He is your soulmate. So, okay, right, he's my soulmate. And it turns out that he is. So, that is a story, just a simple, straightforward, hopefully heartwarming story of how, if you sit back and you let the universe guide you in a certain direction, you can end up where you're supposed to be. And I know I'm supposed to be with this man, and I'm supposed to be in this life and sharing the trials and tribulations with him, because he is the perfect counterfoil for me. He's very calm, he's very measured, he peels me off the ceiling when I get stressed out, and I push him gently out of his bubble of negativity whenever he throws himself into it, which is more often than I'd like. But none of them are perfect, are they? But he's perfect for me in almost every way. So that is the story, the simple story of how I met my husband. And I hope it's cheered you up. I hope it's maybe given you a little bit of inspiration, and just one of those lovely little heartwarming tales that deserves to be told, I guess. And there we are. There you have it. Okay, I will talk to you soon.